Top 10 Strangest and Weirdest GM Engines You Didn't Know Existed. Hey gearheads, welcome back to Muscle Car Masters channel, where we dive into the fascinating world of automotive innovation. Today we're counting down the top 10 strangest engines ever produced by General Motors, from the lightweight yet powerful Buick V16 V8 to the massive GMC 702 cubic-inch twin-six. These engines pushed the boundaries of what was possible, blending creativity with performance. As we go through this lineup, make sure to drop your thoughts in the comments. What's your favorite oddball engine? And if you're as passionate about cars as we are, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and give this video a thumbs up. Share it with your fellow car enthusiasts, and let's keep this conversation rolling. Now let's dive in and get those engines roaring. (1962 to 1963) Oldsmobile Jetfire Turbo V8. What do you get when you mix a compact Oldsmobile with turbocharged power and a splash of mysterious turbo rocket fluid? You get the Oldsmobile Jetfire Turbo V8, one of the strangest and most groundbreaking engines ever created by GM. Introduced in 1962, this was America's first turbocharged V8 in a production car, and it was as exciting as it was peculiar. Under the hood of the Jetfire was a 215 cubic-inch V8, the same all-aluminum engine that powered other Oldsmobile F85 models, but with one crucial difference: a Garrett T5 turbocharger. This turbo system boosted the engine's power to 215 horsepower and a mighty 300 pound-feet of torque at 3,200 RPM. That was 1 horsepower per cubic inch, a remarkable feat for a small V8 in the early 1960s. But there was a catch. To prevent the engine from detonating under boost, Oldsmobile engineers had to incorporate a water alcohol injection system branded as turbo rocket fluid. This concoction of water, methanol, and a corrosion inhibitor was injected into the intake system to cool the air and prevent engine knock. Without it, the turbo's boost was cut off, leaving drivers with significantly reduced power. Unfortunately, many Jetfire owners neglected to refill the turbo rocket fluid tank, leading to performance issues and frequent complaints about lack of power. Despite its innovative design, the Jetfire's complexity and the hassle of maintaining the turbo rocket fluid system proved too much for most buyers. While the car could hit 0 to 60 in about 9 seconds, impressive for the era, issues with overheating, turbo maintenance, and the fluid injection system led to its demise. By 1964, Oldsmobile had discontinued the Turbo V8 in favor of more conventional, naturally aspirated engines. The Oldsmobile Jetfire Turbo V8 remains a symbol of GM's bold innovation in the early 1960s. Though short-lived, it left a legacy as one of the earliest adopters of turbocharging in American cars, paving the way for future forced induction systems. (1930 to 1940) Cadillac V16. Have you ever heard of a car so powerful and luxurious that it became an icon of its time, yet so rare that few know it existed? Enter the Cadillac V16. Introduced in 1930, this engine was Cadillac's bold response to the luxury demands of the era. But what made this engine truly strange and magnificent wasn't just its power. Cadillac produced not one, but 2 distinct V16 engines, spanning 1930 to 1940. The first V16, from 1930 to 1937, was a marvel of engineering for its time. It had a displacement of 452 cubic inches with an overhead valve configuration, producing between 165 to 185 horsepower at 3,400 revolutions per minute and 320 pound-feet of torque at a low 1400 RPM. With a bore of 3 inches and a stroke of 4 inches, this engine was designed for smoothness and refinement, even though more cylinders typically meant more power. Cadillac developed an industry-first hydraulic lash adjuster, reducing engine noise so significantly that the engine was said to be smooth enough to balance a dime on its valve cover while running. The 1930 Cadillac V16 quickly became a symbol of wealth and luxury, with its long 154-inch wheelbase and curb weight of up to 6,600 pounds, making it one of the largest cars ever produced. However, the economic downturn of the Great Depression severely impacted sales. By 1938, Cadillac shocked the automotive world by introducing a completely redesigned V16. This second-generation engine featured a 135-degree flathead design, producing the same 185 horsepower as its predecessor, but with a smaller displacement of 431 cubic inches. This engine was lighter by 250 pounds and shorter, fitting the sleeker designs of the late 1930s. Despite these improvements, it didn't match the first V16's visual appeal. Much of its wiring and plumbing were now exposed to reduce production costs. Despite its technical brilliance, Cadillac's V16 engines never saw wide commercial success, with only 4,076 units sold over 10 years. Yet, the Cadillac V16 remains one of the most legendary and strangest engines in GM history, a true testament to Cadillac's pursuit of automotive excellence. Buick 215 V8. The Buick 215 V8, introduced in 1961, was one of the lightest V8 engines ever mass-produced. Weighing in at just 324 pounds without fluids, it was a fraction of the weight of other V8 on the market. This engine was built specifically for GM's new line of compact cars, including the Buick Special, Oldsmobile F85, and Pontiac Tempest. Buick's approach was revolutionary. They wanted to create an engine that didn't just deliver power, but did so in a way that would enhance vehicle handling and fuel efficiency without sacrificing performance. At 215 cubic inches, the engine wasn't designed to power the full-size cruisers Buick was known for. Instead, it was intended to bring life to GM's senior compacts, larger than the Corvair but still nimble enough for tight city streets. What made this engine remarkable was not just its weight, but its performance. The standard 2-barrel carburetor version produced 155 horsepower and 220 pound-feet of torque, while the 4-barrel version delivered a respectable 185 horsepower and 230 pound-feet of torque. This was impressive for such a small displacement engine, but what really set it apart was its power-to-weight ratio. At just 1.5 pounds per cubic inch, it had the best power-to-weight ratio of any American V8 at the time, outperforming even the larger cast-iron competitors. Buick's engineering team didn't stop at just making the engine lightweight. They used an innovative aluminum alloy with 11 to 13% silicon and 1% copper to ensure the engine would resist corrosion, a common problem for aluminum components when exposed to coolant. This innovation gave the engine a robust design that would stand the test of time. To further extend its longevity, Buick engineers cast iron sleeves into the cylinder bores to minimize wear. The shallow hemispherical combustion chambers, a design echoing Buick's famed nailhead engines, allowed for excellent octane tolerance and smooth combustion, contributing to its high performance and efficiency. Yet despite its brilliance, the Buick 215 V8 wasn't an immediate hit in the U.S. market. By 1963, GM decided to move away from the aluminum engine, opting for cheaper-to-produce cast-iron engines. However, the story didn't end there. In a twist of fate, GM sold the rights to the engine to Rover in the UK, where it became one of the most successful V8 engines in history, powering vehicles like Land Rovers, Morgans, and even Formula One race cars well into the 1990s. The Buick 215 V8 is more than just a lightweight engine. It's a symbol of innovative thinking in an era dominated by heavy cast-iron behemoths. It paved the way for future aluminum engines and remains a testament to Buick's engineering prowess. This engine's story, from its humble beginnings in American compacts to its legendary status in European performance cars, is a testament to its lasting impact on the automotive world. Pontiac 336 V8. Next, let's talk about one of the most unique and often forgotten engines in Pontiac's history, the 336 cubic inch V8. Have you ever heard of this one-year-only oddball engine from the early 60s? Probably not, but it played a crucial role in GM's engine lineup, even if it wasn't around for long. In 1963, Pontiac dropped the Buick-built 215 cubic inch aluminum V8, replacing it with what they called the 326 cubic inch V8. But here's the twist. It wasn't really a 326. In reality, this engine was a modified version of Pontiac's 389 cubic inch V8. The bore was reduced to 3.78 inches from 4.06 inches, which resulted in a displacement of exactly 336.66 cubic inches. Yet, to keep things in line with GM's rule limiting small vehicles to engines under 330 cubic inches, Pontiac badged it as a 326. This engine was no slouch. It retained the same 3 3/4 inch stroke as the larger 389, but the smaller bore allowed it to fit in smaller cars like the Tempest. It was offered in two configurations, one with 250 horsepower and an 8.6-to-1 compression ratio, and another, more powerful version that cranked out 260 horsepower with a 10.25-to-1 compression ratio. Both variants used a two-barrel carburetor. But it wasn't just the specs that made this engine strange. It was effectively a detuned version of Pontiac's high-performance V8, yet it wasn't officially acknowledged as such due to corporate constraints. In fact, Pontiac had been using versions of this engine for GMC heavy-duty trucks, so it wasn't exactly new to GM. What's even more curious is that for the 1964 model year, GM executives caught wind of Pontiac's sneaky bore sizing, forcing them to shrink it even further to 3.72 inches to comply with the cubic inch limit. This slight reduction effectively created the true 326 V8 that would remain in production until 1967. So, if you ever stumble across a 1963 Pontiac with a 326 badge, just remember, you're actually looking at a rare 336 cubic inch engine, an anomaly in Pontiac's storied V8 history. (1962 to 1977) Buick V6. The Buick V6, also known as the Fireball in its early iterations, is a fascinating chapter in automotive history that has endured for decades. Originating in 1962 as a response to the rising costs of producing Buick's innovative 215 cubic inch aluminum V8 engine, this V6 was born out of necessity. Buick needed a more affordable solution, and that came in the form of lopping two cylinders off the 215 V8 and switching from an aluminum block to cast iron, which was easier and cheaper to produce. Initially introduced in the 1962 Buick Special, This 198 cubic inch engine was a 90-degree V6, notable for its odd fire design. Unlike most engines, it didn't fire its cylinders evenly. Its firing impulses alternated between 90 and 150 degrees of crankshaft rotation, which gave it a characteristic rumble and a somewhat rough driving experience. The engine's design, essentially a shortened V8, meant it inherited some of the characteristics of its V8 predecessor, including good power for its size, but also an inherent imbalance due to its uneven firing pattern. This issue was resolved in 1977 when Buick introduced an even-fire crankshaft, which created smoother firing at 120-degree intervals. Despite these early quirks, the Buick V6 became renowned for its performance. Its displacement was soon increased to 225 cubic inches, making it a popular engine choice not only in Buicks, but also in Jeep models. From 1966 to 1971, Kaiser Jeep equipped its CJ models with this engine, branding it as the Dauntless V6. This engine provided ample power, 160 horsepower, and 235 pound-feet of torque, which was more than enough to make these Jeeps highly capable off-road vehicles. Jeep also added a heavier flywheel to the engine to smooth out its inherent vibrations. The journey of the Buick V6 took an interesting turn when GM sold the tooling for this engine to Kaiser Jeep in 1967, only to buy it back in 1974. This move was driven by the 1973 oil crisis, as GM needed a more fuel-efficient engine than their lineup of large V8. Upon reacquiring the V6 tooling, Buick wasted no time in reintegrating it into its lineup. By 1975, the 231 cubic inch version of the engine was in full production again, marking the beginning of a new era for this versatile engine. This V6 would evolve over the years, eventually becoming known as the Buick 3800. It underwent multiple upgrades, including the addition of a balance shaft in 1988 to further smooth vibrations. Fuel injection was also introduced in later versions, enhancing performance and fuel efficiency. By the time production ceased in 2008, over 25 million Buick V6 engines had been produced, cementing its legacy as one of the most successful V6 engines in automotive history. (1961 to 1963) Pontiac Trophy 4. Imagine taking one of Pontiac's legendary V8 engines, cutting it in half, and creating a quirky four-cylinder power plant. Sounds strange, right? Well, that's exactly what Pontiac did with the Trophy 4. Introduced for the 1961 to 1963 Tempest, the Trophy 4 was literally half of Pontiac's well-known 389 cubic inch V8. With its 195.5 cubic inches of displacement, this engine was massive for a four-cylinder, and that's where the story gets really interesting. Why would Pontiac design such an oddball engine? It all comes down to budget constraints and a desire for innovation. Pontiac had no inline-four engine in its lineup and limited funds to create one from scratch, so they simply chopped their 389 V8 in half. This creative solution allowed Pontiac to share more than 120 components between the Trophy 4 and the full-sized V8, including pistons, connecting rods, and even the cylinder head assembly. Production costs were minimized by using the same tooling as the V8, making it economical to manufacture. But let's talk performance. The Trophy 4 was available in several configurations, from a modest 110 horsepower in its base form to a more potent 166 horsepower with a 4-barrel carburetor and a 10.25-to-1 compression ratio. For a four-cylinder engine of the early 1960s, that was impressive power. Unfortunately, the sheer size of the engine, 195.5 cubic inches, made it prone to significant vibration. Pontiac engineers attempted to reduce this by installing large, soft rubber motor mounts and employing the Tempest's unique rope drive system, which acted as a torsional damper. Despite these efforts, the engine earned the nickname Ol' Hay Baler due to its rough-running nature when it fell out of tune. The Trophy 4 had its share of fans, but its time in the spotlight was short-lived. As Pontiac transitioned the Tempest from a compact to an intermediate model in 1964, they abandoned the Trophy 4 in favor of a more conventional inline six. However, for a few short years, this strange half V8 engine offered a unique solution to Pontiac's engineering challenge, and it remains one of the most unusual engines in GM's history. (1979) Oldsmobile 4.3-liter V8 diesel. What happens when an ambitious attempt at fuel efficiency leads to one of the most underwhelming engines in GM's history? Enter the Oldsmobile 4.3-liter V8 diesel from 1979, an engine you've likely never heard of, and for good reason. Designed during the fuel crises of the 1970s, this engine was part of GM's push to embrace diesel technology to improve fuel economy across their lineup. But despite high hopes, the 4.3-liter V8 diesel turned out to be a short-lived and problematic experiment. At the heart of the 4.3-liter diesel, also known as the LF7, was a cast-iron block and head design, which displaced 260 cubic inches. It was supposed to be a smaller, more efficient counterpart to Oldsmobile's larger 350 diesel engine. However, it only managed to produce a dismal 90 horsepower and 160 pound-feet of torque, which made it one of the slowest V8 engines ever put into production cars. It was available for just 1 year and only found under the hood of two Oldsmobile models, the Cutlass Salon and Cutlass Supreme. One of the primary reasons for its failure was its performance, or lack thereof. With such low power output, the engine simply couldn't provide the necessary acceleration or driving experience expected from a V8, even by late 1970s standards. In addition to being underpowered, the 4.3-liter V8 diesel was plagued with reliability issues. Oldsmobile used gasoline engine parts, like the same head bolts and head patterns, which weren't designed to handle the higher compression ratios required by diesel engines. This led to head gasket failures, overheating, and premature wear. Moreover, the engine lacked a critical component, a water separator. In an era when diesel fuel quality was questionable, this omission resulted in water contamination in the fuel system, causing rust and damaging the fuel injectors. With all these issues, the Oldsmobile 4.3-liter V8 diesel quickly became infamous for being unreliable and underperforming, leading GM to discontinue it after just 1 year. While it was a bold move during an oil crisis, the Oldsmobile 4.3-liter diesel remains one of GM's strangest and most forgettable engines, proving that sometimes even the best-intentioned innovations can go very, very wrong. 1981, Cadillac V8-6-4. Imagine cruising in a luxury Cadillac, only to feel the power of your V8 suddenly cut down to a 6-cylinder, or even a 4-cylinder. Welcome to the Cadillac V8-6-4, one of GM's boldest yet strangest engineering experiments. Introduced in 1981, this variable displacement engine was Cadillac's early attempt at saving fuel by deactivating cylinders when full power wasn't needed. It sounds brilliant, right? Unfortunately, the execution was anything but. At its core, the V8-6-4 was based on Cadillac's 6-liter and 368 cubic inch V8, which was a downsized version of the brand's larger 472 and 500 cubic inch engines. The idea behind the V8-6-4 system was simple. When cruising or under light loads, the engine could deactivate either 2 or 4 cylinders, reducing fuel consumption. The onboard computer command module monitored engine conditions and controlled the transitions between V8, V6, and V4 modes, promising up to 30% fuel economy improvements. However, in reality, the technology wasn't ready. The engine's 140 horsepower and 265 pound-feet of torque were decent, but the system struggled with smooth transitions between cylinder modes. Drivers often experienced jerky acceleration and delays, with the car hesitating to switch between 8, 6, and 4-cylinder configurations. The throttle body fuel injection only complicated things further, as it often misjudged the amount of fuel needed for the number of cylinders in use. The result? Cadillac owners quickly grew frustrated with the rough driving experience. Many dealers and owners opted to deactivate the system entirely, locking the engine in full V8 mode. After just 1 year, Cadillac scrapped the V8-6-4, marking it as one of GM's most infamous failures. Despite its failure, the Cadillac V8-6-4 was a visionary concept that foreshadowed the cylinder deactivation systems we see today. Unfortunately, it was ahead of its time, and the technology just wasn't ready to keep up. 1960s GMC 702 cubic inch twin 6. Have you ever heard of a V12 so massive that it powered heavy-duty trucks and even irrigation pumps? Enter the GMC 702 cubic inch twin 6, one of the largest gasoline engines ever produced by General Motors. Built from 1960 to 1966, this 11.5-liter behemoth was designed for extreme-duty trucks, delivering torque that could pull just about anything. The Twin 6 was essentially two 351 cubic-inch V6 engines fused into a single V12, with a block cast as one piece. This design was a marvel of engineering, with 54 shared components between the V6 and V12 models. The engine produced 275 horsepower at 2,400 RPM. Not much by today's standards, but the real magic lay in its torque. With a staggering 630 pound-feet of torque at just 1,600 RPM, this engine was built for power at low speeds. The sheer scale of the engine was mind-blowing. The crankshaft alone weighed nearly 200 pounds, and the engine, fully assembled, tipped the scales at 1,500 pounds. It required a massive oil sump that held 4 gallons of oil and a water pump capable of pushing 118 gallons per minute just to keep it cool. This wasn't just an engine. It was a mechanical giant designed for the long haul, known to last up to 200,000 miles before needing a major overhaul. Despite its remarkable torque and durability, the Twin 6 was short-lived. By the mid-1960s, more compact and efficient engines were taking over, and the 702 cubic-inch V12 faded into obscurity. Still, it remains one of the most unique and powerful gasoline engines ever built for trucks, embodying the bigger is better philosophy of its time. This incredible piece of engineering may not have the flash of a performance car engine, but for those in the know, the GMC 702 cubic-inch Twin 6 stands as a testament to an era when brute force ruled the road. 1959 to 1974, GMC Toroflow Diesels. What happens when an automaker tries to create a diesel engine for medium-duty trucks, but ends up with a strange mix of innovation and headaches? Enter the GMC Toroflow Diesel. Produced from 1959 to 1974, the Toroflow was an ambitious attempt by GMC to offer a low-cost, 4-stroke diesel engine that could fill the gap between gasoline engines and the expensive, noisy 2-stroke diesels from Detroit Diesel. But while it had promise, it didn't quite live up to expectations. The Toroflow Diesel came in 2 main configurations, the 351 cubic-inch V6 and the larger 478 cubic-inch V6, with horsepower ratings between 130 and 170, and torque reaching up to 400 pound-feet. In the later years, a 637 cubic-inch V8 was also introduced, delivering up to 220 horsepower. These engines were built on the architecture of GMC's gasoline V6 engines, which meant they shared many components but were modified for diesel operation. One of the quirkiest features of the Toroflow was its design. Both the intake and exhaust manifolds were located on the same side of the engine, an unusual setup driven by the need to fit the diesel injection pump in the engine's V. This design, along with its toroidal combustion chamber, aimed to improve the air-fuel mixture and boost efficiency. However, the Toroflow struggled with durability issues. The Bosch PSJ injection pump was prone to failures, and the engines were notorious for head gasket problems, especially in heavier trucks. These problems were often exacerbated by high revving and continuous hard use, leading to a reputation for being unreliable. Though the Toroflow diesel never achieved widespread success, it remains a fascinating chapter in GMC's history. It was an early attempt to bring diesel power to a market still dominated by gasoline engines. And while it had its flaws, it paved the way for future diesel technology. And there you have it, folks. 10 of the strangest, most innovative engines ever produced by GM. These power plants may not have always been the most successful, but they definitely left their mark on automotive history. Which engine was your favorite? Did we miss any oddball engines you think deserve a spot on this list? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like button, share it with your fellow car enthusiasts, and subscribe to Muscle Car Masters channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our next deep dive into automotive legends. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.